What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 4 from this week's community gaming tournament. But before we do that, I actually wanted to flash back and take a look at the top 4 from last week. Both of these tournaments are before the OTA, and I'm not going to dwell too much on last week's tournament, but I did want to draw special attention to Molwyn, who got 4th place with this Cerebro 3 list. And the reason that I'm highlighting this list in particular is because Molwyn got 4th place in this event as well with the exact same list. Back-to-back 4th place finishes with Cerebro 3. I think there are a bunch of reasons to play Cerebro 3, which now has Red Guardian and US Agent as brand new tools in the deck, but we've talked previously about how Killmonger stock is definitely rising, and I've personally been looking for a home for Quake. I think at just 2 cost, Quake is a really a powerful effect, and one that has a really great home here in Cerebro 3, and then you still get to run powerhouses like Mobius and Jeff, which are some of the most commonly played cards in these tournaments. We'll get into a full breakdown of how often all cards appear, but just wanted to highlight Molwyn here at the top of this video. I don't think that's the biggest story in this video. That's going to be Sersi. We're going to get to that in a moment. That's probably the thumbnail and title of this video, right? But I did want to give a huge shout out to Molwyn for their performance here with Cerebro 3. Now, I personally really loved Cerebro 3 back when Loki first released. That's what I used because I'm a free-to-play player. That's what I had to use when Loki came out as a season pass card late last year. That was actually, we're getting on a year of Loki being in the game at this point, and it's gotten some nerfs, but Loki is still really strong. Here was the 5th place list from last week, Denny Praise with Loki, and this list is still kicking, did not receive any nerfs from the recent OTA, so Loki is definitely still something that you can do. I actually personally think that Cerebro 3 is like kind of a good deck against Loki, but we'll get to the stats in just a moment. The stats don't really correlate with that for whatever reason. And then the other 2 decks from this tournament, again, this is last week's tournament. We're going to get to this week's tournament in just a moment, but in 1st place we had Luga Gamer with a Hela deck. Hela obviously got a pretty respectable nerf finally in the most recent OTA, so not necessarily recommending this list, but did want to showcase it because it is a little bit different. You don't typically see Orca in these lists. Typically also we're seeing Corvus alongside Hela. Corvus absent from this list, but Sandman making an appearance. Sandman really strong. And then Colleen Wing, kind of a funny one alongside the Hela list where you're trying to discard big cards, but interestingly, like if you only have big cards, I guess Colleen can hit them, but that is a little bit interesting. I guess like turn 5 you go Colleen plus Swordmaster or Blade or something, dump those cards out of your hand, and Colleen Wing is just as likely to hit an Orca or a Giganto as it is to hit a Hela at that point. So that is, part of the theory behind that. Trying to do all of this in one take as well here, so let me know how I'm doing. And also, any comment that you make on this video, as a reminder, will enter you into a giveaway for credits and premium mystery variants and gold. So don't forget to leave a comment down below. And then 1st place from last week was Luke Heads. This is a deck, this is a known quantity. This is partially why I didn't do any coverage of the event last week, because this winning an event isn't like super exciting, but when I can say Sersi won an event, we're getting to that in just a moment, that's obviously a lot more exciting. But Professor X plus Cannonball both received a pretty relevant nerf in the most recent OTA, but there is this deck for posterity, I believe is the word. Anyways, in 4th place from this week, we once again have Molwyn. Didn't make a separate graphic for this, but Molwyn with the exact same Cerebro 3 list. I guess I can talk a little bit about Red Guardian just being a really powerful disruptive card. This card is putting up a lot of numbers recently and I think for good reason. In this deck, you can use opposing Red Guardians can turn off your Cerebro and Mystique, so that is something to watch out for. Cerebro and Mystique previously only really got hit by Enchantress, and then mostly Rogue was the way to interact with those cards, and now it seems like the main way to interact with them is going to be Red Guardian and Lady Deathstrike, which I showcased recently on the channel. It hasn't seen that much play in tournaments, and it seems like Lady Deathstrike is potentially going away in favor of Sersi, but we'll get to that. And then US Agent not going to affect any of the cards in this deck, which is pretty sweet. Even if it did, we've got Luke Cage, but not going to affect any of the cards. And then Luke Cage still doing like a pretty good number. It's doing a lot of work here because Cerebro decks really have to dodge a lot of different locations, and this deck is not running any sort of location manipulation other than Quake, which doesn't take away from any location. So if you see a Nidavellir, that's just like a super awkward location for Cerebro decks. Some other locations can get played around a little bit, like +1 power to everything. That is just like a location where you throw your Cerebro and Mystique. But any negative locations you can easily play around with Luke. So Luke doing some nice work over there. And now let's move along to the third place list from this week. We have discard. We have Proxima, Modok, Apocalypse discard. This is a deck that, as you can see, I don't own these 3 cards. I actually did just get Mike this week, and I believe Corvus is going to be in Spotlight Caches in like 2 weeks or something. So we'll be picking that up, and maybe at some point I'll be able to try out a deck like this myself. And all of that is to say, I'm not super well versed in what this deck is trying to do, the expected power output. I've played against it like a little bit, but it's really interesting to me that this deck does not have the highest ceiling by far of other decks in Marvel Snap, nor does it have any sort of interaction at all. Yet still, it's able to put up some pretty solid results into third place here from Primus19. So let me know what you think about this discard list. It pops up every once in a while, but it's not super popular, but I personally haven't played it. But here is the list if you want to give it a shot yourself. I don't really, unfortunately, have too much more to say about it. I will say, like, I played Apocalypse. It was one of the first decks. Oh, you know what it was? It was the first deck that I got Infinite with after the release of Series 5, when Series 5 first came into Marvel Snap, and it was just like Thanos and Galactus. And before anybody got all those cool Series 4 and Series 5 cards, this was like a deck that I played, and it didn't have any Series 4 or 5 cards in it. Now it has since adapted some of those in, and it is obviously a little bit more powerful because of that. And the season pass card Dakin as well. But yeah, this card is, or this deck rather, is kind of a blind spot, I will say, in my knowledge. And actually, we're getting to another blind spot in my knowledge here, because in second place, we have Phoenix Force, another season pass card that I never bothered to pick up. I think that it's currently available in Spotlight Caches like right now, right this very second, this week. I will double check. I might have to open up one more Spotlight Cache to grab this. And then this list is also doing, so it's a Phoenix Force list, which means that it's running Carnage, Venom, Human Torch, Multiple Man, and Ghost Spider, but then it isn't running any other movement cards. I guess Nico is also a movement card. One of the spells moves cards to the right? Yeah, the right. And then this deck has also thrown in a little bit of a Loki package with Snowguard and Agent Coulson, both of those cards, and I've talked about this specific package before. These two, and then Nico being 3 cards that all allow you to draw 2. That is the important distinction here. We're not playing anything that only allows you to draw 1, but Snowguard, Agent Coulson, pretty good just at giving you a variety of different answers to get out of various jams, but mostly they are cards that draw you 2 so that you can Loki if your game plan didn't come together with Phoenix Force. And I think that Loki is really, really strong in this capacity and honestly underutilized in this capacity. We've seen it previously in a deck that I created and showcased on the channel called Loki. Apologies for those screams in the background as well. I'm hoping that the audio track will kind of drown them out, but that was a little bit of a loud one. But the idea being, you draw your combo cards, great, but this deck needs specific things to function. It needs Human Torch or Multiple Man, plus Carnage or Venom, plus Phoenix Force. And then you probably want Ghost Spider too. And if you don't get that specific combination, that specific recipe of things, then you're probably better off just Lokiing them and throwing them all away. And some interesting cards at the top of this, I kind of want to unlock Phoenix Force and give this deck a spin. Yeah, Phoenix Force currently in Spotlight caches, and I've already opened up 2. I got Sersi and Mike. So maybe I'll open up one more and finally try this Phoenix Force deck. It looks like a lot of fun. Iron Lad for additional consistency. Nico is also consistency. And you know what? I forgot Nico is also a way to destroy both Human Torch and Multiple Man. I'm sure that comes up a lot. And then you're just trying to make a huge Multiple Man and then spread that power around with Living Tribunal, which is not something that I typically see in the Phoenix Force decks as well. But a really cool deck list here brings Imi to a 2nd place finish. And then in 1st place, this you can see kind of, so I got a little bit busy last week. That was part of the reason I didn't create a video. And then there was, the decks weren't as exciting as this week. Also, the day that I typically record these, my dog ran through the neighborhood for 30 minutes chasing a deer, and I just had to chase immediately after the 2 of them. It was a baby deer about the same size as her, so I just chased immediately after them, and then I was just gassed the rest of the day. I was so tired because it was just 30 minutes of nonstop running, and it was scary, and we got her back and everything's fine, but that was a lot. And also, no camera today, as I'm not sure, if I put my camera up on the screen right now, I'd be blocking stuff, so I'm not exactly sure what I want to do for camera in video like this when I just use this layout and make the deck lists as big as I can make them, because I think that's fun, but you're definitely losing a little bit of personality. Anyways, we've delayed it long enough. Here is your winning deck list from this week. I do have Sersi. I just haven't updated my Untapped, but look at this. Look at this. This is a deck list right here. This is some of my favorite cards. Annihilus and Sentry combo with Sersi being a great... I did not see this when we were thinking about ways to brew up with Sersi. Just using it on the Void as a different sort of Lady Deathstrike that then makes the Sentry have an upside, which is absolutely incredible. And then we're also playing Sasquatch, Mysterio, and Mockingbird, one of my favorite trifectas now. I hit Infinite with actually a deck that includes 6 of these same cards, interestingly enough. I'll be showing that off in a video to come. You can try to guess what the deck is in the comments, and I'll let you know. Oh wait, no, not 6 of these same cards. I'm sorry, I did not play Mysterio. I played Jeff, Mobius, Hope, Mockingbird, and Sasquatch. That probably gives it away, right? But either way, I think that this deck is really fun, really powerful. We are seeing Nebula in this list, which is really interesting. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But mainly, we've got the Hood and Sentry and Annihilus, and now Sersi is the 3rd card to add into that combo. And Sersi also gives you an upside on your Mysterio clones. When I showcased Lady Deathstrike about a week and a half ago, Lady Deathstrike had some awkward interactions with Mysterio because sometimes you would have to kill your real Mysterio. You might still occasionally have to Sersi your actual Mysterio, but you will still get a random 3-cost card for that. So not as big of a downside in that regard. And other scenarios where you'll just be able to turn the Hood and the Void into cards that cost 1 more with Sersi is great. And most people probably already know this interaction, but Sersiing Mockingbird and Mockingbird is like not great because it's already a 5/9. Even though you get it out there for cheaper, it'll just transform into a random 6-cost card. Sasquatch currently will not transform into anything off Sersi, but once RSM releases, then anything you Sersi that's a level 6 will turn into a 7/7, and then if you ever Sersi your RSMs, those will turn into deaths. So those are some weird potential synergies to look out for in the future, but for right now, this is the main thing that Sersi's trying to do. The Hood, the Void, Mysterio, occasionally Hope Summers, and if Mobius is like a dead card in the matchup, then you can Sersi that as well. You're probably not going to want to Sersi your Nebula or your Jeff, and there will be times as well where you Sersi your Annihilus, because a 5/6 that's already done its job isn't necessarily going to be that good, and you Sersi it. The average power level is probably a little bit higher, but obviously there is a lot of random RNG behind that. I did also say I wanted to take a look at some matchups in this video, and we won't really look too much at Sersi or Discard or Loki because the Untapped is showing weirder builds of those decks, but the build for Cerebro 3 is mostly, I mean, it's pretty similar to what we actually looked at in this video, with Iron Man and Valkyrie as like bigger over-the-top cards, which is interesting that Molwyn just felt like those cards weren't really needed. Now, if we look at the Cerebro 3 versus Loki matchup, it doesn't actually look that great for Cerebro 3, and I thought this was really interesting just looking at this data here, because I started playing Cerebro 3 to beat Loki decks. They steal your cards and they just aren't as powerful because they aren't able to get full value out of your Cerebro and your Mystique. Now, I do think that Valkyrie and Iron Man in this specific build of the deck does give Loki lists a lot more flexibility, so that's potentially why we are seeing it have slightly worse performance against Loki. But Molwyn did actually lose to Loki at least last week. I'm not sure if he lost to Loki this week or not, and I just wanted to showcase it overall. It doesn't really seem like it has that great of numbers, right? A negative win rate against almost everything that isn't Cerebro 2, Agatha, and I guess negative. But no real decks is it actually beating, but I think that the data might not be telling the full story here. This is win rate, which does typically apply the closest, I feel, to Conquest in tournament games because you gotta win at the end of the day. And yeah, I'm just kind of saying, like, don't count Cerebro out. Obviously, we got a lot to look at this week with some really cool decks. I'm just going to cycle through all of these one more time here. We've got the Cerebro list. We've got this interesting discard list. So a lot of really cool deck lists if you want to try them out. And I also wanted to just briefly look at like the full stats for this week, which I broke down here. And just to explain, I'll have a link to this in the video description if you want to just like browse through any of this data yourself. But just to break down exactly what we're looking at here in case these aren't labeled well enough. So these two columns both represent the data set from the last week's tournament. And then if you want, you can take a look from 3 and 4 weeks ago, respectively, but I'm just going to hide those for right now. And this shift represents how the change over time of these cards being played, and this is an average of, oh, this is just, that's right, I didn't keep the formula, I just shifted these values over. But regardless, this is the average of the 2 previous weeks, 61 and 62, and then the difference on this week. But this is the main data that I wanted to take a look at. I do think there's a lot of interesting things in here. This is the shift just from the previous week. So we can see Jeff went up by 5%, Shang-Chi went up by 12 or 13%, a huge low here for Shang-Chi last week for whatever reason, though as you'll notice, like in this video, no Shang-Chi. So this is the play rates from this week. This is probably the most interesting thing in addition to the weekly shift. So Agent Coulson and Snowguard both went up a little bit, and then Sersi is actually like a pretty considerable amount from last week, and then Sersi obviously being the newest card. Oh, I do also want to say, if anybody wants to look through this data, there's one card that for some reason I am not picking up or tracking correctly, and it's probably one of these cards that like I just have spelled wrong or something. So if anybody knows what that could possibly be, there's a little bit of a flaw in my data collection, but for the most part this is pretty good. We can see what went down the most this week as well, and I think this is a really interesting story. Oh, went down too far. This is a really interesting story here because Red Hulk, Cannonball, and Professor X, I need to make this very clear. The tournament that I'm showcasing in this video happened before today's OTA or yesterday's OTA, depending on when you're watching this. But these cards have started to fall before that, which is really, really interesting. White Widow, another card that I saw some people saying like, oh, interesting, they skipped that one in this OTA. I don't think White Widow needed to get hit, but it is really interesting that White Widow saw such a fall off here, because White Widow actually is kind of a combo with Sersi being one of the best on reveal cards that cost 2. However, White Widow's also not good against Sersi because you can just Sersi that Widow's Kiss that you get from White Widow. So your results may vary, but Nebula dropping down huge percentages, partially because we've seen Killmonger on the rise so much recently. Let's see if we can catch Killmonger here. Actually don't see it. Where's Killmonger at? Right here. Okay, so just a little bit of a rise overall from the previous weeks, an average with 8 appearances this week. Not that many, but that's why I think we've seen a little bit of a downtick in Nebula. Also, Nebula is in these Cannonball, Professor X, Red Hulk, Storm decks. All of these cards just taken a little bit of a hit this week, people choosing not to play them, but Nebula showing up in the first place list. So that's what I think is always so interesting about this data. You have a card like this, which saw the greatest drop off, only 2 copies of Nebula in this entire tournament, and 1 was in the first place list. So I think that's a great way to, this is sometimes just how I like to look at the metagame, and I'm just like, okay, well, obviously, more people should be playing Nebula if it had a 50% tournament win rate, which is just like absolutely absurd and definitely speaks to the power of the card, depending on when you can draw it in the game. Loki still putting up pretty solid numbers at 18 copies. Let's sort by appearances real quick. And I guess, is there anything else that is really interesting up here? I mean, I will say this, Sersi, 9 copies, 17% on the first week. These tournaments are played on the first, they're played on Tuesday. They're played on the first day a new card releases. So when a card starts to see this much play immediately, that is typically pretty good odds that that card is a good card. Now, it doesn't always mean play rate doesn't always correlate to win rate, but we did see Sersi win the tournament this week too. So pretty great results for Sersi all around. And then, oh yeah, that is one other thing we can look at here. I did just briefly color in the different things that were nerfed and buffed. No results from Black Knight and no results from any of the other stuff. Actually, 1 Gilgamesh, 0 Captain America. So that is the main story. We can sort a little bit by just percentage played to showcase here at the end. Jeff, Shang-Chi, we actually see Mobius take a little bit of a hit from the average, though still a slight tick up from last week. Red Guardian has now joined it among the top tech cards. It's sometimes I highlight different things over here each week, and I'll talk about them in the videos and stuff. Sometimes I highlight the tech. This video with an OTA just came out. I just wanted to highlight the OTA stuff. But I do always think it's really interesting to look at exactly what tech people are playing. Shang-Chi, definitely the most represented tech card, if you don't count Jeff, which is kind of like Professor X tech. And that's kind of the interesting thing about Professor X specifically, is it's not a good card against the literally most played card in Marvel Snap, not even close. Every week, this number just goes up. Now, 2/3 of players choosing to play Jeff, which does impact players' ability to win with Professor X, for sure. Jeff just does so much here. But yeah, Mobius and Red Guardian, the next most played tech cards after Shang-Chi. We've got Nocturne, Mockingbird doing pretty solid rates, and then Thena, didn't really talk about this one as much. We can see it actually went up in performance over last week. And Thena's a very good card, basically doubled in play rate, and I think that I don't know, I thought Thena was probably the best card releasing this month. That would have been my pick before the season started. But Sersi, I don't know, maybe we haven't seen everything that Sersi can do yet. Luckily, we have seen everything that Cannonball and Professor X can do, though, as those cards have now been nerfed, and probably won't be talking about them as much, at least in next week's video. I think I'm probably not going to talk about Cannonball, but Professor X could still enter the conversation a little bit. For today, that's going to be it for me. Don't forget to comment if you want to be entered into a giveaway for credits, gold, or a premium mystery variant. And you can also find all of this data in the video description below. And you can also, I don't always mention this part, but you can also find the lists for every single player in the event on the first tab of that spreadsheet linked in the video description. But for today, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.